Mark 8 and 9 and John 7. And if we have time, we'll hit John 5 too, which we still haven't gotten to. And next week, if you want for your notes to read ahead, we're going to be in Matthew 18, Luke 10 and 11, and John 8 through 10. Matthew 18, Luke 10 and 11, John 8 through 10. So, starting in Matthew 16. This is actually a passage I've been studying and referring back to a lot over the last few months. It talks a lot about the Pharisees and the Sadducees. I know we've talked about it before, but just a super quick refresher course. Pharisees are like blue-collar guys. There's a lot of them. They are typically in a position because they've kind of worked their way into, maybe earned their way into the position through a gifting of speech or study or whatever. And they're kind of like the people's representatives. And so the Pharisees are broad. Also, the Pharisees' teaching is basically the teaching that the Jews have today is what the Pharisees taught in that day. Some stuff is a little bit different, but it's pretty close to what when we think of a Jewish belief is the Pharisees. Sadducees were people that had position because of their money. They were wealthy, they were people of prominence, they were related to famous or well-known people, and so their position wasn't necessarily because of gifting, it was because of relation or social standing. Sadducees' belief was actually pretty wild. A lot of the stuff that they believed in was widely accepted as heretical and not stuff that Jews would believe today. So if you think of them being like more eccentric, you know, you're wealthy and so you can believe weirder stuff and people just kind of let you believe it. So Pharisees and Sadducees, they served on a Jewish leadership team together. And the Sadducees had more say, even though there's way more Pharisees. And again, because of their political power. Pharisees hated Rome because Jews should be on their own. Sadducees didn't mind Rome as long as they get to keep their power, because to them it wasn't about anything other than their own authority, their own power. So all of that backdrop to Matthew 16, Pharisees and Sadducees came together to test Jesus. So again, there was common ground between them, but typically when you read in Scripture, it's either Pharisees or Sadducees, not always together. So they come and they want to test Jesus. Again, the Bible talks a lot about testing and testing our faith. And this is like the word that would be for like testing a metal to see what quality of diamond or quality of gold. And then there's testing that's like prove it to me, or trying to catch you in like a lie to see if you really know, or quizzing someone to see do they really know the answers to the questions. And this is more kind of what the Pharisees are trying to do. Like it's about them, not about Jesus. They're not here to see who Jesus is. They're here to try to test Jesus to see if he'll meet their version of what they think he should be. And so they show up and they're saying, show us a sign from heaven. Basically, do a trick, do a miracle. Prove that you're powerful by impressing us with your miracle. And Jesus responds, when it's evening, you say it will be fair weather, for the sky is red. So there's kind of a sailing saying, this sky means this weather and this sky means this weather. It's basically what Jesus says. You know stuff about weather. You know how to discern, is this a good day to go out to sea or not? But you can't discern like spiritual things, the practical things, and you are spiritual leaders. So you can see practical things, but you can't see spiritual things that are going on. And he says, an evil and adulterous generation seek after a sign. So he's saying it's really not a whole lot different than like if we were to come to church on Sunday and say, I'm here to be impressed by the musicality of the worship team. I'm here to be served by the kids ministry team, so I don't have to care for my kid. I'm here to to be impressed by a message that someone brings that's profound and impressive to me, what they learned. That's the heart that these guys are showing up with. It's clearly about serving them, their desire, their want that they're coming to Jesus with. And Jesus is saying, you're spiritual people asking spiritual questions, but you have self-centered and you have natural eyes and focus instead of the spiritual ones that you're meant to have. And basically says, what you're looking for, I'm not going to give you. The sign that you want, I'm not giving you. The only sign you're going to see is the sign of Jonah. And this is Jesus is going to be crucified 3 days in the tomb and then come out. So just like Jonah was in the fish for 3 days. So then Jesus then turns to the people and says, watch out and beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the Sadducees. So leaven is something that you add to bread to make it rise and or to, well, I don't know exactly how bread works, but it's a small part that you add that creates it to be all that it's supposed to be, right? And it doesn't take a lot to do it. So the point that Jesus is making is, hey, a little bit of these guys' perspective is really bad. But when Jesus shares it, everybody doesn't really know what he means. And so Jesus goes on to explain, I'm not talking about actual bread, it's a metaphor. That we've been reading about the thousands being fed and those things. He's talking about their perspective. So this is important. And again, that's why it's important that we know who the Pharisees and the Sadducees are. So a little bit of leaven from the Pharisees and the Sadducees, what would that practically look like then, or what would it practically look like today? So if I am like the Pharisees, maybe I'm biblically correct in the stuff that I'm talking about, but what I want it to do is self-serving. That's like a Pharisee. So a spirit of religion might say, these are the Bible verses I believe. And so I would attest this to some like kind of the way that I grew up. If you can use the Bible to make an argument and win and logically present a stance or a point of view that's holistic in that it uses the Old Testament and the New Testament and the Greek and the Hebrew, and the way that you present it together is logical and assertive and convincing, then you're right. And someone could come to you and say, well, I don't think that's true because the heart of Jesus, you can stop them right there and be like, look, you have to meet me on the grounds that I'm on, that I am scripturally accurate using good arguments, solid, and meet me here and beat me here or don't show up. This is kind of the Pharisee heart where I've chosen the playing ground that we'll fight on, and if I can win here, then I win, and if you can't beat me here, then you're wrong and you don't win. And so there's a heart of this that exists in the church today for sure, where God is speaking to the heart of a person, but they're trying to maybe through their mind, well, that couldn't be God because I read this thing and this theologian said and this preacher that I heard online said, and emotions are bad and maybe it's just my emotions. And so the leaven of the Pharisees is really that God himself has to prove himself through like your mind and your understanding and history and religion and facts, which it almost sounds like that's how it should work. Why wouldn't God prove himself through facts? Why wouldn't God, use logic and the mind? But think about a sick person healed. What does that have to do with logic and the mind? Nothing. It steps around how healing works. It steps around, or a prophetic word. It steps around the natural. It's something that you know, that you can't learn, or a word of wisdom, a word of knowledge. It doesn't pass through your mental capacity of how you learn to tie shoes, how you learn to build something. It's something other than that. And so it's like we want this perspective wants things to be this way, except for when they're not, but we want it to be this way. And so you can see how you can get stuck, You can get stuck in the way of the Pharisee. The way of the Sadducee is that who you are, who you're related to, what you know, what money you have, what prestige or position that you have, and the way that the world sees it is what makes you right. So your kid comes to you and says, why did you do that, but I can't do that? And you say, I'm the parent, shut up. That's a version of this. So maybe there's a reason, maybe there's a justification, but basically leaning to your position, not the truth of what you did or didn't do, that's kind of the Sadducees. That because I'm wealthy, because of my influence through my businesses or through my ownings, I've been given greater position in the eyes of Rome. Therefore, my voice and my position garners more respect. I'm right. Or John Maxwell talks about the 5 levels of leadership, and the first level of leadership he references is the weakest form of leadership is leading because of your title. Do what I say because I'm the boss. It's really poor, weak leadership. Do what I say because I'm the boss. This is my title, therefore you have to listen to me. You haven't inspired anyone. You haven't helped them. You haven't educated them. You haven't trained them. You haven't learned them. You haven't found the right spot for them. Just do what I say because I'm in charge. And so this is kind of the Sadducee perspective. And Jesus is warning the church to stay away from this. So, there is so much in that short passage of Scripture. I really encourage you to look at it, see what God would show you in that. Then from there we see Jesus has this conversation with Peter. So he has this profound conversation. And again, remember, who is he speaking against? The leadership of the church as they know it. And so there's a problem with the covering of who's there. And then following this, then Jesus says, okay, what do the people say? Those who are influenced by or around these Pharisees and Sadducees, who do people say that I am? And so the disciples respond and they say, some say you're a prophet, some say you're John the Baptist, some say you're Elijah or Jeremiah. And then he says, okay, but who do you say I am? And then Peter has this really profound response. He says, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. What's another word for Christ? Starts with an M. You have to say it loud enough for me to hear you if you're talking. Messiah, yeah. And so what is Messiah referring to? The Old Testament prophecies of this one that will come and change everything for the Jewish people, right? Change everything for everyone. So all throughout Old Testament, it says a Messiah is going to come. No one argues that. Sadducees, Pharisees, nobody argues that. Who it is, what he'll look like, and what he'll do. Everyone's arguing. But that there is one, no one's arguing. And Peter says, you're him. You're the Messiah. This is a big statement. To call someone a prophet's kind of a big deal, but it's not that big of a deal in comparison to calling someone the Christ, to calling someone the Messiah. And so Peter says, you're the Messiah. And Jesus says, you're blessed because you didn't learn this through what? What does he say? Verse 17. Flesh and blood. What is it referring to? How does it tie into the conversation we just had with Pharisees? How do they want to learn? Through their mind, through the logical, linear thinking. And he's saying, what you know, you didn't learn how they want you to learn. How did you learn? What does it say? God. God spoke to you. My Father in heaven revealed this to you. So, if you're Peter and the disciples in this conversation, you've grown up under Pharisee and Sadducee rule. These guys were around for 100 or so years before these guys were born. They haven't always been there, but they've been around their whole life. So Pharisee and Sadducee rule, approach, wisdom, their version of things is what these guys know. And Jesus is saying, beware of the way that they lead, the way that they speak, because it's actually really harmful. And then Jesus begins a conversation with them about who he is, a big deal. What are people saying? How about you? Peter says, you're the Messiah. And he says, you're so blessed that you know that. But how do you know that? The pathway that they want you to use didn't get you there. The Father revealing. Go ahead.
Is it, so I don't know this, I'm wondering, is it also that as Jewish people, I know they kind of have a history of having one person who speaks the word of God to them? Is it also kind of this teaching them like, you do hear from the Father, you can hear from the Father, you, like, I don't know, but is that kind of what's
No,
happening?
it's
Like,
good.
You don't have to hear from these people because you have relationship with me and therefore with my Father.
Yeah. I think the one delineation I would make is it's not necessarily one person that they heard from, but it's a group of people that they hear from. And so even like the times of the Old Testament, you have prophets, but most of the prophets overlapped with other prophets. Or when you went to the temple or to the tabernacle, there was many priests who worked in there. But you're absolutely right. It's skipping a step of through some leadership, through like the Levitical priests, through these are the people that you can trust. God himself skipped all those steps, and now he's speaking to you. So you're absolutely right in that there is change coming, and we're going to start seeing it in this chapter and the chapters to come, that Jesus is saying like what you've known and how you've known it, it's all fixing to change in a really big way. And so you're absolutely right. You're keying in on a big part of what transition's happening at this place in the Gospels, which is really cool. So he says, this truth that the Father has revealed to you, I'm going to build my church on this truth. Of what's the truth? Jesus is the Messiah. How do Catholics interpret this verse? Peter. Peter's the what?
Pope.
Well, he's the Pope. The first Pope is what they would say, but that on the rock of Peter is what the church is going to be built on. In the context of what we're reading, is there any reason to believe that that's what Jesus is saying? I mean, it's such a weak argument in the context of what's being talked about here that the way of man and the way of man's thinking, a little bit of that mixed into your life is going to be a really big problem. So tell me what God is saying. And Peter says, God says, you're the Messiah. And then Jesus turns around and says, you, Peter, you're the man that everything's going to be through. It's literally the argument that he's making is not that. Catholicism gives them about 45 seconds before they reestablish it again. Josh.
Isn't that kind of like the crux of our like American church right now though? Is like we live everything like verse by verse by verse instead of context and context and context. And so all of these verses are taken out of context and applied to so many different things that there's so much misunderstanding. And so the argument, of course, when you read it in context and you have the entire picture, could be easily made, well, Jesus is just talking about Jesus, like, of course. But like people who don't know, who don't read at all, and just hear that one verse, of course that makes sense that he's talking to Peter and he's telling Peter like, you're the guy, you're the fella.
Yeah.
But that's just the crux of the church to begin with, and like just the history of the church in general in the medieval times, not having to be able to, or no one able to interpret it or read it, and stuff. It just goes back to that. And still to this day we can read it, but we choose not to. So we stay disinformed purposefully, like willingly.
Well, and I think you're absolutely right. And I think the whole point of what's happening here is this transition that's happening from the Old Testament to the New Testament, the Old Covenant to the New Covenant, that is so clearly being brought to a point. The Messiah is the transition, which even all Jews believe, that maybe not that Jesus is, but the Messiah is where everything changes. Most believed, or many believe, that he would show up as a military leader, defeat Rome, and that's what the transition looked like. But what Gloria so aptly pointed out is it's how things work will radically change. And so the entire Old Testament is saying, things are this, but one is coming. See David? Even better than that. See Isaiah? Even more than that. See, like all the promised land, it's going to be even better than that. Like, there's all of this pointing to this one, and when he comes, everything will change, even how you hear from and interact with him. And Peter says, and you're him. And Jesus is like, yes. And the church will be built from that. And then everything after this, you're the body, I'm the head. Like, you're living stones being built up together to be the church. Like, there's all this language speaking to, because the Messiah came, here's all that's happening. And like we were reading earlier in the Gospels, Jesus was preaching the gospel to everybody that is coming, has come, and then in the rest of the epistles, since he came, the language is leading to this pivotal moment, and Peter is the one professing it, and everything changes from there. It has nothing to do with a person's role. It has to do with everyone's role changes. And so a practical way that we look at this today is if I'm leading someone, or if I'm giving someone an opportunity to lead, or discipling someone, let's say, if I speak to them in a way, or disciple them in a way that in order for them to know what God is saying, they need me to affirm it, I have become a Pharisee and Sadducee. If I insert myself, now not as someone that can help you, encourage you, train you up, and model for you what it means to hear the voice of God, but if I insert myself as like, hey, the next time you have a question about Jesus, come talk to me and I'll tell you what the answer is. I've become the problem that Jesus is walking them out of. If I'm discipling a person and I don't trust that when they're in their room by themselves, that without me calling or without me talking to them, that Jesus himself by his Spirit is going to speak to them, or if I lead them in such a way that when every time they have a question, they're calling me instead of asking God, I've become the very problem that Jesus is changing everything for. Now, of course, I believe in discipleship. Of course, I believe in walking with people. It's a huge part of Scripture. But never, ever, ever in a way that takes the place of a person speaking to God themselves. And so like Eli and Samuel, you're hearing God. That wasn't the point. It was that you didn't know that it was God that you were hearing. So listen to him. And so it can feel like you're being helpful. And especially those of us, I know some of us have been in roles of pastor or mentor to people where people are really struggling and they're leaning on you or looking to you to help them. By nature, people are going to look for you to become that for them. And you have to fight against it. Your love for them needs to point them to Jesus still speaks and you can hear him, that the word is a living word and it will lead you, and I'm here with you and I'll help you and I'll share how he's speaking to me and encourage him as you're learning to hear from him too. But if the moment that I step into that place, and I think this is the sneaky part, is if I'm afraid for people to hear from God themselves, that speaks to what I believe about the Spirit of God and what I believe about this person's ability to hear the voice of God. And that should mess with me. That should bother me. Gloria.
This is speaking to me as a parent, because I think culturally, too, it's like so much about being there to be that person for our kids, right? And it's like I'm having to have, as I've had kids, I've had to have this transition of thought that's like, and it's still taking place, where it's like pointing them to God to be that person and being, like, we're literally discipling our kids, right? And like you're saying. So we're not supposed to have all the answers or be that person. And even like my son, like he wants me to speak his prayers for him and then him repeat, but I'm trying to teach him, like, it's your relationship with God.
Yeah.
You need to be talking to God. And what does that look like?
Yeah.
And it's like, it can be hard to have that shift mindset, I think.
It is. And I it's such a great example too, Gloria, for parenting, because when your kids are little, they need more help, but then as they get older, you should help them less, because if you don't, you're not helping them anymore. Like, there's a point where your help in a kid's life is not help, it's hindrance. And so you'll meet 18-year-olds who are completely unable to do anything for themselves because everything's been done for them. That's not a gift. That's a problem that you've created for them. So, and no parent does it perfectly, and we all do our best, but it's like, as they're getting older, it's like, okay, where do I trust? And where do I remove the obstacle? Where do I speak encouragement? Where do I just kind of let them? And it's the same thing in discipleship. Sure, at the beginning, like, you might be saying a lot of, like, this is where this verse is, and here's some verses for you to start reading and this is the difference between the Old Testament and the New Testament. But then with time, if every time they have a question or need prayer or whatever, you're the answer, you haven't helped that person. You've become Christ to them instead of pointing them to Christ. And you guys are amazing, and I'm thankful for all of you, but me included, we would be a terrible Christ. We're not him. We need him, and we can point others to him too. And then again, as a parent, the part that I'm learning as my kids are getting older is that, Teresa has a voice in their life, I have a voice in their life, but then as they get older, they have other people that are voices in their life too. And it's learning to be excited about and thankful for that, because other people will share things that you won't, and you might disagree, or you might not even like some of the things that they share or the way that they share them. But that's all part of, like, their launch into adulthood and life. And so in much the same way for discipleship, it has to be that process and transition and change as maturity comes, but never leaving ourselves in the place that only exists for God. It's pretty cool stuff. It's interesting, though, how the very thing that Jesus is pointing to and helping with is the thing that the Catholic Church is built on. Like, it's to misunderstand the whole chapter is their starting point for. So that's why I make the distinction of, it wasn't one voice, it never was. Today it kind of gets made that way, and that's what the Catholic Church really turned it into in large part. It was voices, it was people of this tribe and their responsibility. But the voice of parents in the Jewish culture is huge. The voice of other parents in the Jewish culture for other people's kids was huge. And so a lot of the Catholic version of the one voice is actually a perversion even of the Jewish version of that too. So cool stuff. So this is what's fascinating, though. Peter has this amazing revelation. Jesus tells him how blessed he is, the Father revealed this to you. And then Jesus begins to share it. And guys, this is what's coming. I'm going to be persecuted. I'm going to be arrested. I'm going to be killed. And this is part of what's going to happen. And then what does Peter slide into? He slides into natural thinking. So he's, to use the language for today, he is spirit-led in the answer to Jesus' question. And then when he hears Jesus being persecuted and the idea of Jesus being killed, he slides then into natural thinking. And so he pulls Jesus aside, and Peter, whom we love, rebukes Jesus. You know that Christians still do that today? Rebuke Jesus? It's unkind for you to do that, Jesus. Yeah, whenever we find ourselves rebuking Jesus, let's read this verse. And Jesus, what's his response to Peter? We all know the verse. Say it real loud, Skylar. Get behind me, Satan. Man. So, a little note to all of us. Just because I was being spirit-led 2 minutes ago doesn't mean I'm safe now. Like, we need to continue to lean into his spirit and not assume just because I had success a moment ago that now I can do it in my own strength. We need to live spirit-led. We need to stay there, live there constantly. So the phrase I wrote down that came to my heart as I was reading through this is, professing Christ is not the same as following him as Christ. And so Peter professed him as Christ, but then he used his own wisdom to determine what was right and wrong. And so he wasn't following him as Christ. If Jesus is the Messiah, he's not wrong. If Jesus is the Messiah, then whatever he's telling you right now is right. It is the correct way. And so as Christians, in the same way, we need to be careful. I believe in Jesus. I believe Jesus is the Christ. I believe he is the way to heaven. But the way that I live my life is I see him as someone that I consult in the decisions that I make. That he's someone that I consider his perspective in the choices I make in my life. That's to profess him as Christ, but not to follow him as the Christ. And it's really important that we live both. That professing Christ is not the same as following him as Christ. We need to profess him as Christ and follow him as Christ. Make sense? Gloria. No, it's great.
This is making me think of that, like going back. We keep going back to like abide in me, and I will abide in you.
Yeah.
Like he's just been teaching me about that, like always needing him, right?
Yeah.
I think that's kind of what you're saying, and I think Jesus keeps coming back to that later too. Is like always need me, always seek me, always be with me.
Yeah.
Because we have to. Because that's so interesting what you're saying. Like we could be spirit led one minute, but then not the next minute, which is so true.
And I don't mean to say that to be fearful, but it's like you said, it's to remind us we need to stay in him.
We always need to
Yeah.
be in him,
Yeah.
connected to him.
Yeah. Yeah, the John 15 vine. And then which beautifully takes us into the last part of chapter 16. If anyone would come after me, I must deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. So again, we've talked about this a lot as a church, how it begins at baptism. Baptism, it's death. It begins at the altar. It's death. It's death to self and receiving the finished work of Christ, his death on the cross. But the death to self part is so important because if I know that even a little bit of my own way apart from him, just like a little bit of leaven from the Pharisees and the Sadducees is a big problem, that reminds me and that motivates me, maybe is the word, to start dead, to lay down my own way, my own thinking, my own perspective, that I need to be Spirit-led. Like you're saying, Gloria, that it's not my strength, my perspective, my wisdom. I need his. And even just a moment later, I can so quickly find myself off track. And so Jesus then is reaffirming again, don't trust in yourself. Don't trust in the way of men. He's not saying, and guys, now follow Peter. He's saying, like, to follow me, you have to die to yourself. You have to leave yourself behind to pick up your cross and follow me. If you want to save your life, lose it. But you're going to lose your life if you try to do this on your own. He's literally helping them to see there's a cost. The moment that you step out of the Father revealing to you versus, I think I know what to do here. And that the cost is so high. What will it profit a man if he gains the world but forfeits his soul? Yeah. And then even says that, hey, there's some of you guys here that you're going to learn this in a way that people for hundreds or thousands of years will benefit from your struggle. It's pretty profound. And then we go into chapter 17. Any final thoughts on 16 before we jump into 17? So this is the Mount Transfiguration. We talked about this, I think, some last week. Jesus goes up, takes a few with him. Behold, Moses and Elijah appeared to them, talking with him. I just love verse 4 and the other passages. Peter said, "It's good that we're here." I don't think it's wrong to be glad that you're there when God is doing something cool. But I think the moment that we say, "It's good that I'm here. I have an idea," that's when we can start getting into some trouble. So Peter, it's good that we're here. I have an idea. This is what we should do. God throws down a mist and says, "Shut up and listen," but nicer. They fell on their face and they were terrified. Jesus came and touched them. "Get up, don't be afraid." And then they see that the guys are gone. And it's interesting. Jesus says, excuse me, don't tell anyone about this until later. So Jesus on the Mount of Transfiguration, 3 guys see it, and when are they allowed to talk about it? Not for a while. If it's you, me, and one other person, and we're on the Mount of Transfiguration, we see Moses and Elijah, we hear the voice of the Father, this stuff come in, this mist, the presence of God that you just fall on your face terrified. How many days do you want to wait to tell everyone about that?
Yes,
someone asks you, what'd you have for lunch? Who cares? Guess what I just saw? Like, what question could be more important than this? But this is what Jesus says to them. But there's an interesting thing that we find here in Matthew. His disciples ask him, when do the scribes say that Elijah must come first? So in the Old Testament prophecies, it says that there's an Elijah that's going to come before the Messiah. And so again, Matthew's written to who? Jews. And so they're asking Jewish questions. These are the things we're supposed to look for in the Messiah, right? And Jesus answers the question. Elijah is coming and will restore all things. But I say to you that Elijah already came. And they did not recognize him. Who is Jesus talking about? John the Baptist. A voice crying in the wilderness, right? He already came and they did not recognize him, but did to him whatever they wished. So also the Son of Man is going to suffer at their hands. So what has happened to John by this point? He's been beheaded. He's been killed. And so the example that this is, again, referring back to the Peter conversation. What's the Father revealing versus what we think? And so when you read a verse that says Elijah will come, what is everyone expecting? That Elijah will somehow miraculously appear. And so how many people made the connection that John the Baptist was the Elijah? And so how would you determine that? Logically, you can't. So again, even what God is saying and how God is fulfilling his promises, a lot of times won't be logically obvious to us. So, the disciples understood that he was speaking to them about John the Baptist. And then we go into the same story of they come down off the mountain. Josh, go ahead.
Just a quick question before we move too far. Was there a significance to Peter asking about the shelters? Because it seems pretty random. But I don't know.
We'll build one for you, one for them, one for them.
Tabernacle. He wants to be honoring.
It's culturally there. So, yeah. I mean, Jewish history. It would be like the thing that you do: build a monument, build a tabernacle, build a. This is what you do. This is the. So it wasn't negative. It wasn't like self-serving necessarily. In the way that it was totally off point. It was just his own way of piecing together, this is what you do in a moment like this. Yeah. Josh, I would equate it to something like a person has an amazing encounter with God and has this sense of, God has called me to follow him and to share his message, so I should go plant a church. Like you had this really amazing experience. You felt and saw and so all of that is true, all of that is good. And then in my own mind, so here's what I should do. It's that last piece that you then, so this is what people do who have that, therefore.
You just try to add something to it that wasn't even
He was eager, like God was still there. They were still there. It wasn't like at the time had passed. He just kind of spoke up in eagerness to do something honoring, which he would have read about in the scriptures.
Yeah.
But I think just excitement.
Yeah. I mean, I think we see it. I mean, in a worship service, in a prayer set, that there's something that's stirring inside of someone, and so I should do something. And so they share or do or whatever, and the heart to do it maybe is good, but the thing that they're doing isn't necessarily spirit-led. Yeah. So then they come down off the mountain. It's a great question, great insight. Come down off the mountain, the guy with the demoniac son, brought him to your disciples. They couldn't cure him. And Jesus responds. It's interesting. Sometimes Jesus seems more upset than you think he would. It's funny. If you talk to people today about Jesus, it's almost like this weird history of him has been created where Jesus was just a loving guy that was widely accepted as, a good guy and, had great insights. It's like, yeah, they killed him. He wasn't widely accepted. He wasn't just like sweet and kind. Like, he comes off the mountain. There's a guy who his son is being tormented because of demons. He's falling into fires. And like, he's asking for prayer. His disciples are trying to cast the demon out and they can't. Like, this is an opportunity for Jesus to be very understanding. And what does Jesus say? You unbelieving and perverted generation, how long shall I be with you? How long shall I put up with you? Bring them here to me. It's interesting. I think sometimes Jesus speaks firmly, maybe for lack of better language, firmly to the spirit of the problem that's there. He's not rejecting people, because what does he say? Bring them here. What is his ultimate purpose? To serve this kid and his dad. So he's not rejecting anybody, and he's not like firing his disciples. He obviously continues to walk with them, but he's speaking against the problem that is there. And I think sometimes today we need to get better at that, where we can speak firmly against the problem that exists while still loving the people that the problem exists in or around. Jesus was really good at that. And Jesus rebuked him, and the demon came out of him, and the boy was cured at once. And then the disciples came to Jesus privately. Come on, you gotta love that little insight. They were publicly humiliated, and so they privately asked why. How come we couldn't do that? Because it's not fun to ask publicly how you failed publicly. So they came to him, why couldn't we? And Jesus said to them, because of the littleness of your faith. For truly I say to you, have faith the size of a mustard seed. You'll say to the mountain, move from here to there, and it will move, and nothing will be impossible for you. So, again, this is one of those topics, passages, things that I've just been asking God. Mustard seed is an extremely small seed, if you've ever seen it. It's not the smallest, but it's, worth noting because of how small it is, and then a mustard tree that grows from it is very large in proportion to the size of the seed of what's contained in it. So I think the picture that Jesus is saying is the thing that you have can be small, and the thing that you get because of what you have can be very, very large. I've heard some say, because of this, mustard seeds are so small, everyone has mustard seed faith. I don't think that's true. Because if mustard seed faith everyone has, then mountains would be moving all over the place. And how much Jesus talks about you of little faith and where is your faith. I think the point is God breathes planets into existence, and so how much effort it takes for him to do ridiculously miraculous things is nothing. But if we can just grasp even a mustard seed amount of faith, if we could just believe, if we could just, it's like even at the beginning of this journey of faith, you'll see amazing things. I don't think it's meant to say everyone has that. I think that's a disservice to what this passage is saying. I think he's saying it doesn't take much of the creator of all of the universe to do something miraculous. And if we can walk in faith, nothing will be impossible. To me, I think there's a call here to really the presence of faith is easily identifiable because of the fruit of the presence of faith. So how do we know if we have the presence of faith? The easily identifiable fruit of the presence of faith. And so if we don't have the easily identifiable proof of the presence of faith, what should we be asking God to help us concerning? Give us faith. That's where I'm at, anyhow, for what that's worth. Verse 21, this does not go out except by prayer and fasting. That you may not have that verse in your Bible, verse 21. That's in the King James, the original, when the first guys who numbered the verses and everything like that. Most manuscripts that we have don't have that verse in it. If that's not a conversation you've ever had, King James has a handful of verses that are in Scripture. So you might have a verse that goes from 20 to 22. And you have people on the internet that say, look, you're taking out verses. It's not true. It's not taking out a verse. It's the guys who created the numbers for the verses had something in that maybe shouldn't be there. But basically, most or all the verses that you see that are in the King James Version, are still in the Bible, just not in that spot. It's really kind of a non-issue. And so anybody who says this is that's why you shouldn't use anything but King James, it's just a silly argument. We'll see in the other gospel account, it doesn't say, but this kind does not go out by prayer and fasting. It just says, this does not happen but by prayer. And so probably when they translated this in whatever version they had, when they made the King James, they added the part that's in Mark into Matthew, something small in the same story. So
Mine is New King James, I guess. But mine has it in Mark 29, or Mark 9:29, and the one we're also looking at, 17:21 in Matthew. It says the exact same thing
yeah,
in both places. And I honestly wanted to ask about it because I was like, however, this kind does not go out except by prayer and fasting. What is that? What is that?
yeah,
You're not hungry enough to cast out this demon.
yeah.
You see, if you had enough faith, you could move mountains. However, this kind doesn't come out by prayer and fasting. And I don't want to jump to conclusions and think epilepsy only comes out by prayer and fasting, but it also sparks this curiosity in me.
Right. Yeah. So what does prayer and fasting do? Prayer is communicating with Him. Fasting is rejecting self, natural, for Him and His way, right? So what's the whole conversation we've been having in all these passages? Don't let even a little bit of the leaven of the Pharisees and the Sadducees come in. Peter, good, you heard from God. Peter, not good, you heard from yourself. So when I see this problem that's in front of me, and a kid flailing and falling into fire, if I fall into, this one seems worse than the last demons we cast out or whatever, and I begin to logically think why this should be different, whatever, I'm not leaning into faith. God can do anything. I'm leaning into maybe what I see. Then by remembering who He is and not being impressed with who I am and what I can see, it's not like you get 7 points for every week that you fast and you need 45 Christian points to cast out a demon. It's a mustard seed of faith. It's Him. We need Him. And so when we don't have Him, what do we have? The world, ourselves, and that's not miraculous.
I wonder, too, if it could be speaking. I've had this in my life where I've been, for my own healing, I had a place where, I was so focused on, Lord, I know you can heal me, And I was so focused on the desire to be healed. And it's He had to bring me back into this place of, just be with me and look at my eyes, And He literally took me through this visual process almost, and I was healed after that, I think, for sure I can fall into that of, seeing what I want to happen and knowing God can do it, but being so focused on wanting that I'm, losing my focus on Him almost.
Yeah, I think that's a part of it too.
I don't know, because it seems like the disciples were trying so hard. Right?
Yeah. Yeah, and it doesn't, and truthfully, it doesn't say.
Yeah.
So what Jesus would be alluding to in saying this doesn't come but by prayer, it doesn't expressly say in the story. But I think, again, when you look at all the times that Jesus talked about prayer, and the Bible talks about fasting, the heart behind those things, and again, there's a supernatural quality to both. Like if you're ever in a worship service or a church service, and you're singing about like life is this, or like I have this, or I can do this, it's very different than when you're in a worship service where like you really exalt and see and encounter Christ. Something happens when that happens. To enter his gates with thanksgiving and praise, like your King Jesus, like, and here you are, and you're talking to us, and you're here with us, and you're enthroned in this praise for you. Everything else you say and pray and hear and read and share is different. And how you receive and the root that it takes in you is different. And so I think so much of prayer and fasting is seeing him rightly. And that he is the greater prize than healing. Not that you have to do this in order to obtain healing, or I'll stay sick, I don't mind. Like I'm not saying that, but like, yeah, he's more. Of course he's more. And so maintaining that heart. If I go to this word and I just try to learn something so that I know something that other people don't know, it's not him that I got. It was something else. And he's more than that. And so, yeah. And again, the disciples cast out all sorts of demons and healed all sorts of sick people. I'm not standing in a place of judgment over them. They have more success in ministry than I do. And I'm asking God to help me. And so, but there's a message here, there's a story here that's worth leaning into and gleaning from. So, yeah. Then the end of chapter 17, they come to Capernaum. They're talking about tax and money. And, verse 27, Jesus says to Peter, hey, go fish. When you get the fish, you'll have the money in it. Pay him with that. That's kind of a cool story. But verse 25 and 26 is really what's so interesting to me. Jesus spoke to him first saying, what do you think, Simon? From whom do the kings of the earth collect customs or poll tax? From their sons or from strangers? So he's pointing out the heart behind. So when you're, we're a democracy or a democratic republic, so it's a little bit different. But when senators and Congress people raise taxes, who are they usually trying to raise taxes on, themselves or other people? When they're trying to cut budgets, whose budgets do they cut, theirs or other people's? This is the way that it's always been. When kings collect taxes from people, they don't collect taxes from their sons. They collect from everybody else that depends on them. And so Jesus says, who do they collect from? Their sons or strangers? And Peter says strangers. Jesus says, yes, sons are exempt. So there's this beautiful imagery that basically Jesus is calling out the wickedness and the crookedness of the way of the world. And then immediately he follows and says, yeah, but go fish, pull the money out of the fish, give them their money. There's no sense in stirring up places that we don't need to. It's just such a cool little inserted passage here that I enjoy greatly. All right, let's continue on to Mark chapter 8. So again, we've read this. This is the story of the 4,000. Jesus, says that they're too far from home, the place that they're at. There's nowhere to eat, so feed them. They had some fish, some bread. And again, the Pharisees came and began to argue with him, seeking him for a sign from heaven to test him. Sighing deeply in his spirit, he said, why does this generation seek for a sign? Truly I say, no sign will be given to this generation. he embarks to the other side like we read about. And then again, watch out, beware the leaven of the Pharisees and the leaven of Herod, this passage talks about. So this is the leadership that is there. And again, the leaven of the Sadducees and the leaven of Herod would be very similar. In what way? Why is Herod in a position of leadership? Why are the Sadducees in a position of leadership? Because of their wealth and influence and position. And so, in their social status. And then again, the disciples don't understand why you're talking about bread. He says, I'm not talking about bread. Why would you think I was talking about bread? We literally just fed 4,000 people with like no bread. We're talking about spiritual stuff, not practical stuff. And again, the same message is coming across. Stop looking at practical things. Stop having practical eyes. Start having spiritual eyes. Don't see things. We don't have bread. 4,000 are fed when you don't have bread. Beware of the leaven of the Pharisees and the Sadducees, the leaven of Herod and the Pharisees. They said, well, what bread are you talking about? He says, no, I'm talking about spiritual things. So you can see this contrast that's being made back and forth, and then it goes into Peter, who do you say that I am? Same thing. And so you're the Messiah, you're the Christ. And then later, because I'm the Christ, I'll suffer and die. And then Peter goes from spiritual eyes to practical eyes. Get behind me, Satan. This is the message. So die to yourself. Stop trying to answer every question practically. Stop trying to understand everything in the way that you want to understand. You've heard me say this, and this is something I've wrestled with off and on over the years, is I want every truth of Scripture. I want every reality of the person of Jesus. I want every call and direction that God gives me to pass through my linear, logical mind. And so there's so many times that God has been talking to me or leading me, but I can't hear him, or I don't hear him. I don't respond to him in the way that I'm meant to, because I'm asking something to pass through something it's not meant to pass through. I'm saying, God, I want to have spiritual eyes practically. I want to have a miraculous perspective naturally. You can't. And so this is where faith comes in. Because what faith do I need for a practical, I let go of a baseball, it falls to the ground. Like, there's no faith required. There's a practical understanding of how things work. Faith or a trust in God and what he's saying is saying, even though as far as I've seen or understood it works like this, you said this, so it doesn't work like that anymore, or it doesn't work like that here. That's believing him more than I believe what I think. It's believing him more than what I've seen. It's trusting what he says more than what I've seen. It's trusting what he's saying will happen more than what I've not seen happen. Which requires what? That my view, my perspective would die so that I could live in the perspective that he wants me to have. That I would believe him and his voice and his word and his way more than I believe what I think and what I've seen. So I have to die to myself to have this. I have to fast, as it were, the natural things so that I can understand and receive the spiritual things, the supernatural things. This is the whole point. This is what Jesus is talking to his disciples about. He models it. I mean, how much more of a groundwork for this conversation do you need than one person's lunch feeding 8, 10, 12,000 people? And so he's saying, hey, look at that miracle. I'm miraculous. Trust and have faith in my miraculous power. And Peter goes, yeah, but practically, but we do the same thing. Lord, please heal this person. I know you're not going to. I've never seen it done, but I'm praying. Anyhow. God, move in this family member's life. I know that they're extremely stubborn and very much of the world, and so they probably won't, but it would be cool if that was somehow possible. Maybe that's just me. Chapter 9, Jesus back on the Mount of Transfiguration. Peter's so glad that he's there, has the wrong idea, asks the question about Elijah. He speaks to him of John the Baptist. And then they come back, the demon-possessed boy. Same thing, except this time it says, verse 29, this cannot come out by anything but prayer, is what transcripts say. So it doesn't mention fasting in the Mark account, and it's not in the Matthew account. So again, is it heretical that the King James Version has that verse? No. Is it like making some point that goes against Scripture? No, it doesn't. Yeah, so that same message. And I love this father, this picture that's there. I think in our own journey, this is a good prayer to have, not as an arrived place, but a process place. He asks them, if you can do anything to help my son, please take pity. And Jesus responds and says, if I can. God, creator of the universe, if you could help me in this moment, if you're capable enough to do this tiny, small, super small, insignificant thing, like if you were able, I mean, I'm telling you, our if it's your will and if you're able prayers, I think they just come out of our mouth sometimes, and we don't really think about what we're saying. If it's your will, that if it's his will, like if you're able, if he's able, like those are strong statements we're making. And so this guy does it. Jesus responds, if you can, all things are possible for what does he say? For Jesus. All things are possible for Jesus. Is that what he says? Verse 23, 9:23 of Mark. If you can, all things are possible to him who believes. Pisteo, believe, trust, faith, they're all the same language. So, not if Jesus can do it, everyone who has faith, everyone who trusts Jesus, this is what's available. And the guy's response, I believe. Help where I don't. Help my unbelief. I believe you. I trust you. There's a part of me that's not 100% sure, so if you can help me with that, please help me, but I believe you. Again, we're not meant to stay here, but God, He loves us and He helps us while we are there. It's beautiful. And Jesus says, only by prayer is how this comes out. And then immediately the disciples have a conversation about who's the greatest. It's fascinating, isn't it? Jesus feeds the thousands. They don't understand why and how He can. Jesus does the miraculous. Peter gets to experience what it's like, the miraculous, to move through him. And then he starts to look practically. Jesus speaks to them about you need to die to yourself. You need to focus on Him and His way and not look at your own practical perspective. You need to pick up your cross and die daily. And then they try in their own strength and they don't. Jesus says, if you'll just look to me, if you'll just trust me, you'll see the miraculous. You'll see people set free. You'll see people healed. Just trust me, believe me. Stop looking at yourself. Start looking at me. Stop looking at things in the natural. Start looking things in the spiritual. And they immediately say, who do you suppose of us is the best one? How that's possible, I know from personal experience. So they have the conversation quietly amongst themselves, and Jesus goes, hey, what are you guys talking about? And they're like, nothing. And so Jesus knows what they're talking about because He's Jesus. And He says, if anyone wants to be first, He has their attention because this is what they're talking about. He says, he shall be last and a servant of all. And they're like, that's not the direction I thought this was going. Josh.
You You skipped over the part where you share the personal experience.
I'm just saying, I know from personal experience how I can be utterly destitute, sitting over here, getting ready to speak on a Sunday, and I'm saying, God, I have nothing in me to offer. I'm so broken. I'm struggling. I see no way out of this situation. I desperately need your help. There's nothing in me that can offer anyone in this room anything that will matter. And he says, trust me, believe me, follow me. I come up here in faith, saying, okay, fine. And I get up here, and God is so faithful, and he speaks through me. And even though I saw nothing and had no idea of how it would all come together, God moves, and people are blessed, and people are helped. And I walk back to my seat, and I go, dang, you see me up there? What? Like, and I'm not saying I stay there, but like that thought tries to come into my mind where it's like, I couldn't even walk up there, much less offer something of worth and value. But that's what our mind can do, is come into it and say, like, yeah, you're amazing. You can't remember 45 seconds ago where you knew you were in desperate need of him. But this is what happens when we are not spirit-led and we're self-led. The moment that I walk off this place that I know I desperately need him, and I just sit down where I don't need him at all, and I lean into my own strength, and yeah. How's that for a personal explanation? Is that good enough for you? So you want to be first, be last. If you want to be something, serve people. And then he takes a kid. He says, whoever receives one child like this in my name receives me. And whoever receives me does not receive me, but him who sent me. And then there's this really cool 38 through 50. And John says, hey, we see a problem. Other people are casting out demons. And Jesus says, don't hinder him. For anyone who does perform a miracle in my name and be able soon afterward to speak evil, no one will be able to do that. If they're being used by me, they're doing the work of the kingdom. They're doing the work of the kingdom, and they'll be of the kingdom. Who's not against us is for us. And then he begins to speak about what does it look like to serve. He says, anyone that you give a cup of water, it's not going to come back void. But whoever causes one of these little ones to stumble, it would be better for a millstone to be hung around their neck and cast into the sea. If your hand causes you to stumble, cut it off. It'd be better to be crippled in the kingdom than to go to hell where there's unquenchable fire. So here's another verses that are there or not there. Verses 44 and 46 are not in early manuscripts, but they're in the King James Version. And it says, where their worm does not die and the fire is not quenched. And he says, if your foot causes you to stumble, same thing. If your eye causes you to stumble, pluck it out, same thing. And then verse 48, it does say what it says in 44 and 46. And so it's just repeated in 44 and 46 in the King James, but it's not in 40. There is no 44 or 46 in all other manuscripts. So nothing happened, nothing bad, nefarious, whatever. It just is repeated. And then verse 49 and 50, for everyone will be salted with fire. Salt is good, but if the salt becomes unsalty, what will you make it salty again? Have salt in yourselves and be at peace with one another. So just a smattering, as it were, of cautions and encouragements and exhortations for them. And then I'm just going to hit John 7 super quickly and we'll be done. Jesus says the world's going to hate you because of me. Again, this idea that Jesus was just loved and lovely and kind is a false narrative. He says the world's going to hate you because they hated me first. People argued about who he was. And then one of my favorite verses, verse 15, people saw Jesus, they heard him speak, and they were astonished because he was such a good teacher, even though he didn't go through what they said people had to go through to be a good teacher. Can I just tell you, please hear me. God can make you whoever he wants you to be. You don't have to do it in some way that someone says you're supposed to do it. He can make you great even though no one believes in you. He can make you wise even if you never went to Bible college. He can make you a leader even if no one sees you as a leader. You can lead a ministry when you don't look like anyone who leads that ministry. You can lead a church even if you're the kind of person that people would never guess can lead a church. You can lead a ministry even if you look at your gifts and you've never met anybody that has the gifts that you have to lead a ministry. Don't Don't fall into the trap of believing that where you come from and what makes you has to look like what people have determined. Jesus didn't even fit the mold. Jesus didn't fit the mold that the church said people in Jesus' position should fit the mold. That he had a wisdom that they couldn't match, even though he didn't do the thing that wise people need to do in order to become wise. This is such a powerful verse. Underline it, highlight it, whatever, for yourself and for others. Don't be bound by what people say you must be or what process you must go through to become, because that's not him. Even Jesus wasn't that. And you're going to meet people and you're going to wrestle potentially with that same question of, am I really, could I really, because I don't and I didn't come from, none of that matters. That's not him. And Jesus says the same thing we've been talking about. What I'm sharing is what the Father shared. How can you be wise today? How can you lead ministry today? How can you impact youth? How can you impact kids? How can you impact adults? How can you lead worship in a way that moves hearts? Why? Because the Spirit of the living God is in you. You're the beautiful vessel that he pours through. It doesn't matter where you came from or who you know or what education you do or don't have or what history you do or don't have or how many people did or didn't believe in you. Jesus is saying that the affirmation of who I am and what I've done and what I can do is because the Father speaks through me, because the Father has affirmed who I am. Because he's the one moving, because it's God working through. The reason why we can is because it's God working through. And then Gloria, as you said earlier, I think verse 38 is really a continuation of that same, where he's saying things are fixing to change. Verse 38, he says, he who believes in me, as the scripture said, from his innermost being will flow rivers of living water. The guy that you go to is gone. The person that you have to be involved in the process with you is gone. Jesus didn't establish Peter as some new person that you had to go through. Jesus says, not only do you not need to go to an outside person, I myself will come reside inside of you. And a river that the best the priest could do is dip a cup into and pull something out of, that river will flow from within you out. It's so much different and so much better. And people got mad. And people argued. And they debated over who Jesus was and what he was and what he had a right to say. And sure, they saw the miracles. Maybe he was a prophet. Maybe he was a wise teacher. But could he really be the Messiah? And they were all too scared to really talk about it and say it because they didn't want to be persecuted, because they cared more about their social standing and their positions than they did about actually finding truth. And even the people that the Pharisees and the Sadducees sent to arrest Jesus stood in front of him, heard him teach, and thought, I'm not arresting that guy. And when they came back and they said, why didn't you arrest him? They were like, I couldn't. I heard him. Because it wasn't his time to be arrested. And that's where we'll end on chapter 7. Any last thoughts, guys, before we're done? Thank you, everybody. Isaiah, can you grab the...